What if the calm you remember from 1960s Ohio was not comfort, but something you learned to accept without question? There is something about life in Ohio during that era that people who lived through it cannot forget. Morning routines, steady workdays, familiar faces, and music that seemed to belong to every home at once. If you grew up then, you felt how belonging came naturally as long as you followed the unspoken rules. Compared to later years, life carried a quiet confidence, mixed with a subtle pressure to stay in line. Families, neighborhoods, and workplaces shared the same habits, creating a sense of order that felt both reassuring and limiting. If this kind of remembering resonates with you, like and subscribe to support the channel. Now, let's move closer to the everyday moments where those feelings took shape. That is where the deeper truth of living there begins to surface. Ohio, at the center of American manufacturing. Back then, Ohio felt like the engine room of the country. Factories hummed before sunrise and stayed loud after dark. I remember driving past long brick buildings where lights never fully went out, and that sight alone explained a lot. But that was only part of the story. Those machines mattered because they promised steady pay, clear routines, and a future that felt dependable without being spoken out loud. Men left home before breakfast and came back with the smell of oil still on their jackets, carrying a quiet pride that never needed words. It looked strong, but that strength came from millions of small, repeated days. You trusted the calendar, the paycheck, and the idea that showing up was enough. At the time, no one questioned how long this rhythm could last. It simply moved forward, slowly, quietly, in the background. The industrial heartland. What did it mean to live inside the industrial heartland when you were not thinking about industry at all? Streets were shaped by shift changes, and entire towns breathed in time with factory whistles. And that was just the surface. What mattered was how this work organized life, from dinner hours to school schedules to weekends that felt earned. People measured time by production cycles, not by headlines or trends. It felt secure. But that ease came from something very specific. Jobs stayed close to home, and families built their lives around places they could walk or drive to in minutes. There was little rush to reinvent yourself. Everything had a place, even if no one said it out loud. And beneath it all, something subtle kept moving, almost too quietly to notice. Small towns and the promise of the American dream. This detail explains a lot about why small towns in Ohio felt so steady back then. Main streets stayed familiar, with the same stores, the same faces, and the same greetings year after year. Few people noticed it, but it shaped daily life. The promise was not about getting rich, it was about staying put and doing well enough. Homes were modest, but they felt permanent. Schools, churches, and local diners formed a tight loop that most people never needed to leave. It looked simple, but simplicity was not accidental. It came from shared expectations, steady work nearby, and a belief that progress did not require constant change. Life moved at a pace that felt agreed upon, and slowly, without noise, that sense of certainty began to thin. Cleveland industry neighborhoods and growth, smoke rising over the river at dawn, streetcars rattling past brick houses, and people already moving with purpose. Cleveland felt busy, but grounded, and that was just the surface. Neighborhoods were built around plants, docks, and rail lines, creating pockets of life that felt complete on their own. You could live your entire week within a few miles. It felt efficient. But that ease came from careful balance. Industry paid the bills, while neighborhoods held the culture together. Stores, schools, and corner bars carried memory as much as function. At the time, no one realized what this would lead to. Growth kept coming, quietly reshaping blocks while routines stayed the same. Something familiar remained, even as the edges slowly shifted. Youngstown and the Steel Valley. There was a quiet confidence in Youngstown that came from steel. Mills defined the skyline, and the sound of work never fully disappeared. But this was not the full picture. What mattered was how deeply steel entered family life, shaping pride, patience, and expectations. Generations followed the same paths, not out of pressure, but because it felt natural. The work was hard, yet it carried meaning. It felt solid. But that solidity rested on shared sacrifice and unspoken trust in the system. Paychecks supported entire households, and loyalty ran both ways. Even then, something subtle moved beneath the noise. The valley felt steady, though a faint shift was already quietly present. Akron and the rubber industry. Akron did not just make tires, it shaped how people understood work itself. The smell of rubber hung in the air, especially after rain, and everyone knew what that meant. But that was only part of the story. Rubber mattered because it created schedules, neighborhoods, and identities that felt tightly bound together. Shifts rotated, but routines stayed firm. Families planned meals, sleep, and weekends around production lines that never fully rested. It felt dependable. But that dependability came from scale and repetition, from knowing the plants would be there tomorrow. You did not talk much about alternatives. Life rolled forward on familiar tracks, and somewhere between night shifts and early mornings, the rhythm continued, steady but quietly adjusting. Toledo, Columbus, and economic diversity. Why did Toledo and Columbus feel so different? Yet somehow connected, Toledo carried the weight of manufacturing and glass, while Columbus moved with schools, offices, and growing government work. And that contrast mattered. It showed how Ohio could hold multiple futures at once without calling attention to it. Toledo felt rooted. Columbus felt quietly flexible. It looked balanced. But that balance came from geography and timing. Jobs were spread across sectors, allowing families different paths without leaving the state. You could stay close to home and still shift direction. No one framed it as strategy. It simply felt practical. And beneath that practicality, something subtle kept unfolding, slowly, without announcement. Cincinnati and regional identity. Cincinnati never fully felt like the rest of Ohio, and people knew it. The city leaned south, culturally and historically, and that difference shaped everyday life. But this was not the full picture. What mattered was how regional identity created confidence rather than distance. Neighborhoods held strong traditions, food, accents, and habits that felt inherited. It felt settled, but that stability came from deep roots and long memory. Businesses, churches, and families stayed connected across generations. You did not rush to redefine yourself. The city moved at its own pace, and quietly. That sense of distinctiveness continued, familiar, yet gently shifting at the edges. Housing small towns and everyday life, front porches at dusk, kids riding bikes until streetlights came on and doors rarely locked. Housing felt modest, but solid. And that was just the surface. Homes mattered because they anchored routines, not status. Mortgages were manageable, yards were shared, and neighbors watched out without talking about it. It felt easy, but that ease came from predictability and proximity. Work was close, schools were local, and errands followed the same routes. Life unfolded in repeating patterns. Nothing felt urgent, and yet, beneath those quiet evenings, something slowly shifted, almost unnoticed, like a season turning early. Food heritage and the culture of everyday Ohio. Meals carried more history than people admitted. Recipes passed through families, shaped by immigration, faith, and factory schedules. Few people noticed it, but it shaped daily life. Food connected neighborhoods, church basements, and weekend gatherings without effort. It felt familiar. But that familiarity came from shared timing and shared tables. Dinner followed shifts, holidays followed harvests, and celebrations followed tradition. You did not call it culture. You simply showed up and ate. And as those routines repeated, quietly, something began to loosen, though the flavors stayed the same. Agriculture, food, and shared culture. How could farm life shape Ohio even for people who never worked the land? Fields stretched beyond town edges, and harvest schedules quietly guided the year. But that was only part of the story. Agriculture mattered because it stabilized prices, routines, and expectations across the state. Local produce filled markets, school lunches, and family tables without much thought. Seasons were felt, not discussed. It felt grounded, but that grounding came from proximity and trust. Food did not travel far, and people knew where it came from. Even city life leaned on rural rhythms, and beneath those familiar cycles, something subtle kept moving, slowly, almost out of view. Sports weather and the rhythm of the year. Friday night lights, snow piling along sidewalks, and radios tuned to familiar voices. Sports and weather set the pace of life, and that was just the surface. These moments mattered because they synchronized people without planning. Games, seasons, and forecasts gave everyone something shared to anticipate. It felt communal, but that feeling came from limited choices and common schedules. You watched the same teams, endured the same winters, and talked about the same outcomes. Time moved in predictable loops. At the time, it felt endless, and quietly, between seasons, the rhythm softened, though the rituals remained. Education challenges and the end of an era. At the time, no one realized what classrooms were preparing students for. Schools felt orderly, practical, and closely tied to local jobs. But this was not the full picture. Education reflected confidence in nearby industries, shaping expectations early. Guidance felt straightforward. But that clarity came from limited paths that still felt sufficient. Challenges existed, yet they stayed mostly unspoken. You learned, graduated, and stayed close. The future seemed nearby, and slowly, without announcement, that alignment began to loosen, almost imperceptibly. What Ohio represented in the 1960s. This helps make sense of what Ohio stood for back then. The state represented reliability, effort, and belonging without spectacle. And that was just the surface. What mattered was how ordinary life felt dependable. You could work, raise a family, and stay rooted. It felt honest. But that honesty came from shared assumptions about progress and stability. Ohio did not chase attention. It simply kept going. People trusted the system because it had not failed them yet. And beneath that calm confidence, something subtle shifted, quietly, as if waiting. This journey through 1960s Ohio comes down to a place where work, routine, and quiet confidence shaped everyday life without asking for attention. If you want to see how those feelings carried forward and also began to bend, the next story waiting on your screen explores life just west of here in the following decade, where factories, cities, and daily rhythms revealed even deeper contrasts and unexpected details that build on everything we have just remembered. If this story felt familiar to you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own memories or reflections in the comments below. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I will see you again in the next video.